Mickey Dickey here, and CPI came in at 4.9%, which those of you who've been watching my other videos, when I was doing my projections throughout the year, that was my hope, was to be right around 5% for the April reading. Although once we got the March reading and it was at 5%, I was hoping for a little better, but we're right where I thought we would be at this point. But Dave set up a video here, and I wanted to make some comments on it, and I'm going to run the video. I'll make some comments as we're going through it, but just to give you some general idea what we're talking about here, I don't think this is Dave's forte, so to speak. He's been great at helping people with their personal finances, and I think he's missed the boat on this particular one in a large way.
So the Fed raised the rate again, another quarter of a point.
How many times have they done this now?
They're just not smart. Because the economy's just booming, so we should definitely do things to screw it up and slow it down. We can't have that.
Okay, now I want to start here. The first thing he comes out here and says is that they're just not smart. Dave, that's just not true. It's not factual. It's not reality. And as though most of you know, that's really what I'm focusing on in my videos. I want people to understand what's really going on here. And to come out and say that people like Jay Powell are not smart and they're doing stupid things, let's actually talk about what is smart and what is stupid, rather than saying that they're stupid. And I wish we would take the politicalness out of this. For whatever reason, everyone seems to want to make all this politicized. And those of you who know me well enough to see my videos, I try not to bring politics into this, in as much as it doesn't affect the finances for my clients and what I'm trying to do for them and anyone who's listening to the videos. I do know there's some overlap on it, but I don't think everything out there and everything in the business world is politically motivated. That's just my opinion. And again, I want to deal with reality, and sometimes I think we have a hard time grasping the fact that things are what they are. As an example, inflation was at 9.1% last year in June. It's currently at 4.9%. And literally every month since June, it's gone down. That's a fact. And we don't want to deal with facts sometimes. And that kind of interests me, why we try to ignore facts and reality. But we'll listen to the rest of the video and I'll give you some more comments.
Of course, they want to get all the pain out of the way before there's a presidential election, so they're getting all this crap out, because people will forget to be mad 2 years from now.
Again, bring it back to politics. Please understand, Jay Powell was in office with Trump. He's now in office with Biden. I don't know how you could have two further from each other political parties or administrations, and yet he's in both. So I don't think Powell is politically motivated on this. Although I do think he's been bullied by the politics of it, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Now's the time. This is the 10th time, it says, that they've raised the rates.
And all in a process to slow down inflation that was not caused by an overheated economy. It was caused by an underheated supply chain caused by Fauci.
Okay. Now, again, stop here for a moment. I'm not going to get on the Fauci, non-Fauci, or whatever chain here. The simple fact is, during the Trump administration, we shut down the world, and we spent money that we shouldn't have spent. The Biden administration continued spending after the fact. All of these are facts. All of this is true. It's what happened, okay? And again, I'm not going to sit down and blame Trump. I'm not going to blame Biden. I'm not going to blame Fauci. Let's just deal with reality. And what he's saying is that the inflation that we have was not caused by normal market functions, okay? But we have it. And yes, it was caused by us shutting down not just the country, but the world. Okay, so it wasn't just us. It was the world that shut down. Now, my issue with this is it's not just what happened during COVID, which was 3 years ago. And I really would have expected our businesses to be able to handle this situation and get through this, which we don't seem to be able to do, which makes me question whether or not where we're at now is the same cause of inflation that we had from COVID. And has, the fact that we did have the COVID shutdown and create the supply chain issues, but is that truly what's driving inflation now? And the reason I point this up is this. Now, those of you who have seen this chart, and I'm going to show you it again, this is lumber. This is wheat. This is a year on the chart, folks. And I know this is boring and I get it. This is heating oil. This is soybeans. Now, again, I know you're all excited about all this stuff. I get it. My point is that every one of these is lower than it was here. Significantly lower than where it was. My interesting part of this is that when you look at the current consumer, so this is today's read, but take a look at the numbers year over year. And I'm not as concerned about April over March. I'm concerned about the year over year numbers. Look at what's creating everything. Again, this is the 4.9. Look at food. 7.7% year over year. 7.1 from food away from home. So that's your restaurants. Energy up. Food 0.8. The whole energy sector is way, way down. But look at the parts that are up. Electricity's up. Okay. All items less food and energy up. Look at shelter up 8% year over year. Which the interesting part of that is that it's a very large percentage of the CPI, and we're already seeing numbers showing that real estate is starting to turn over and may turn negative. We're not sure, as those you've seen my other videos. There's two parts of this that I'm really concerned about, whether we're going to have what we would consider a true recession rather than a made-up one like Dave's talking about, where we've just shut the country down, and that's, again, not a true recession in my book. A true recession is where the actual market drivers create it. It's unemployment and it's real estate. Clearly, if it's up 8% year over year, it's not negative. And look at transportation. This is airlines. This is air travel, 11%. So when we start looking at these numbers, and I understand what Dave's saying, I want you to keep these in mind, and we'll come back to this in a minute. I'm having a hard time understanding where Dave is saying all this stuff is because of COVID. If we haven't figured out supply chain issues at this point, 3 years later, I don't think that's a COVID problem. I think that's a business problem, and the businesses haven't figured it out. But my bigger question is, and Tyson came out the other day and their numbers, they were saying that chicken prices and their prices for their foods were all down. I'm not seeing that at the grocery store, and when I look at this stuff, I don't see it at the grocery store either. So my question is, if all of the inputs are down, wheat, fertilizer, coal, oil, all the stuff is down year over year, why are these prices up? What's causing them to go up? Especially when you dig into this, and it's not on this particular chart. I haven't been able to pull it up for you guys yet. When they're saying that real labor or real wages actually went down year over year. So if wages are down year over year, so they're not increasing the CPI number, what's raising it? I'm having a hard time comprehending that because it doesn't necessarily make sense to me, because it's not following what Dave is saying, and it's not necessarily following what we're talking about, but it is following what Powell keeps complaining about and his questions and concerns that inflation is becoming sticky. So we'll have to see. Only going down, and those of you who see my other charts, here's what I'm trying to explain on the inflation front. And let me scroll down here for you. You went from 5 to 4.9 from March to April. And when you look at the gasoline prices, you went from 3.5, now it went up, but year over year, you're still down 12%. So if gasoline went down 12% and we only went down 0.1, again, what else are we missing here? There's a part of this number that is not being shown up. So I'm going to go back to Dave and listen to the rest of his video because there's more on here I want to talk about.
So attack the wrong problem, you get the wrong solution.
Yeah, you just should have fired him long before he finally got around to quitting, and then you'd been better off. When you have math done by the medical community, apparently they're not good at it. So this is what we get into. So anyway. Yeah.
What does it mean?
Anyway, let me try to explain what I'm rambling about and mumbling about here. The problems with inflation were caused by supply chain disruption. Supply chain disruption is defined as a shortage of goods. The shortage of goods, anytime there's a shortage of anything, it causes the prices to go up. Remember toilet paper? And there's a rush on it and prices go up and people price gouge and everything else. There's a shortage on oil because you turn the pipeline off because you have an electric thing going or whatever it is you got going, a green thing you got going, and you turn the pipeline off and you shut down the supply of gasoline prices go up. So the little sticker on there that says, I did that with Biden, yes, he did. He did not do.
Okay, now we need to stop here for a minute. And again, when we start looking at these numbers, yes, on gasoline, when Biden took over, gasoline went up. But gasoline since last June has been going down. Now that's a part of the market. We also have the issue with Ukraine, which, again, I'm not defending or beating up any politicians. I don't know that there was anything that Biden could have done or Trump could have done to stop Putin from invading Ukraine. Russia invaded a country under Trump, he invaded one under Obama, and now Biden. So again, I'm not going to go down that path, but what Dave is saying is that oil is up. It's not up still. It's up since then, but even there, it's not up horribly. It has come down. So the question is, if oil is coming down and gas prices are coming down, why are they not back to where they were with the other things?
The other parts of inflation, but they were caused by simply Fauci, because when you shut down all the factories and they don't produce stuff, you create a shortage of stuff. And the shortage...
Okay, again, let's deal with some facts. How long were the factories shut down? Anyone? Bueller? I don't remember the factories being shut down for 2 or 3 years, Dave. I remember them being shut down for a little bit, and I know some states were shut down longer than others, but I don't think any of them were shut down more than maybe a month or two. And again, if we can't figure this out after being shut down for a month or two in 3 years, again, I'm going to blame the administration and Fauci and everybody else for shutting the country down at the time, but I'm going to blame the businesses for not figuring this out in 3 years. Sorry. And I know we've had rolling COVID problems where we've had systems shut down for this or that, but the vast majority of businesses and factories have been up and running for the majority of this time. And I don't have specifics on this, but I'm probably going to dig into it because it's going to be an interest to me now that I'm saying that. How long were they really broken down? Which again, let's deal with some facts, Dave. You say this statement, but there's nothing backing this up. How long were the factories down? Because you say it's the problem, but I don't think it is. Honestly, I think one of the biggest problems is, and again, I'm not trying to say this is good, bad, or indifferent, but a lot of what we used to buy was made in China. Cheaply, I might add. And China's been locked down a lot longer than the rest of the world was. And I'm guessing that we didn't get a lot of stuff from China the way we normally got it. So maybe that's where he's talking about. I'm not sure. But again, I don't remember the United States factories being shut down for a very long period of time.
Of stuff causes the prices to go up. Oh, by the way, when you declare an entire segment of the economy as non-essential, you're not essential. Talk about freaking insulting. How would you just like to be called non-essential? How do you recover from that psychologically? You're non-essential. I'm essential, but you're not essential. That's the ultimate in snobbery. But anyway, we did do that, right?
Yes.
And so if you're non-essential, then you create, and then when you want everybody to come back to work, they go, screw you, I'm non-essential. I'm not coming back to work. By the way, you're giving me lots of money to stay at home, so I'm not going to come back to work. Screw you. I'm not going to wait your tables. I'm not going to make your beds at the hotel, and I'm not going to stock your shelves at Target. Oh, what if we paid you $20 an hour instead of $10 an hour? Oh, then I would come back. Okay, then you came back at double the rate, almost, what you were paid pre-COVID. Oh, by the way, that cost of that loaf of bread has in it the labor to put the loaf of bread on the shelf, which is now double because of the shortage created by quarantine. So even labor was supply chain disrupted. All of that created this artificial inflation that would have smoothed out on its own if the freaking Fed had stayed out of it. But instead, they decided...
Okay, we're going to stop here. And there's a bunch of little problems in this little snippet. The first one we're going to deal with is people not wanting to go back to work and essential or non-essential. If people are taking offense to people saying that your job is essential or not essential, grow up. And Dave, you need to grow up too. I'm sorry. There are some jobs that are quote unquote essential, i.e. firemen, i.e. police officers, doctors. And it's not about whether the people are essential, it's the position that's essential. There's certain things that we need to have moving and going every single day. Now, that doesn't mean that the person who's cutting hair isn't essential, okay? That's not the point. Well, the point is that if you have a pandemic and it's truly a situation where it's a problem, and again, we can debate whether this was it or not the point. When we did all of this, I don't think anybody knew. And when you start shutting things down, you have to use terms like that. And I think, again, we need to grow up and be real people and be real adults about it. They weren't trying to be offensive to anybody, Dave. But here's what interesting part of this. Dave has tried to help people over the years with their finances, as have I. And one of the things I have pushed for years and years is to try to get people to understand that in two-family incomes where you have two-parent families, you don't necessarily have both of you need to be working. And I've tried to explain that for years. Now, I'm in South Carolina, so my income bases are probably a little different than other places in the country. So not trying to focus on the income part of it. Let's just say you have someone who's the main breadwinner's making $45,000 a year, and the second person is making 25 or 30. So between the two of them, they're making $75,000 a year, which they're getting by. Nothing special. They're not, they're not rich. They're not like the Pelosi's of the world or the Trumps of the world. They're getting by. What I've tried to show them is that if you have, let's say they got 3 kids at home, and they're running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to get them to their sports and their dance classes and all the things that need to be done in the world. What if instead of having a newer car, you had a little older car, because the second person staying at home doesn't necessarily need the transportation that's as good as need be. So you get rid of maybe a car payment and less maintenance. But that person's staying at home making breakfasts, making lunch, making dinner. So we're saving money on that. We're saving money on gas driving back and forth to work, saving money on if the second income person is a female who has to buy makeup and dresses and clothing, and all that kind of adds all into this. So it becomes a less of a burden on the family. And I've tried to show this actually in budgets for my clients for years and years. Normally, that second person's not making as much money. And the net, after you take off all of the tire changes and the oil changes and all the expenses for doing what needs to be done. But more importantly, as my wife continues to say, the true wealth in today's world is time. And what COVID did for these people is make them not have both jobs. So when he's saying that they're not going back to work for these particular reasons, which seems to be this big sticking point for a lot of folks. They can't understand why people aren't going back to work. And I'm sure part of it at one point was that they were being paid to stay home. But again, we're 3 years later. They're not still being paid to stay home. So we need to throw that argument out the window. It's not valid anymore. What is valid, I think, is the quality of life has become better for these families. Because just like he said, the person that was making 45 is now making 55 or maybe even 60. So what they found is that they could survive. They had to survive because they weren't making the money and haven't been making the money. Even if they were getting the COVID money, it was only about a year and a half for that. We're well over a year and a half from actually having any of them having any more COVID money being brought in. But what they found is that without eating out as much, they actually had a better quality of life by having the second income earner staying at home. Now, that's just my opinion, and I can't nail it down with facts. But when you continue to sit down and look at the numbers where we still have 1.6 jobs open for every person, we're having trouble getting people to fill the jobs on the lower end of the spectrum as far as income basis. Now, we're also still having a trouble with the higher end too, but the higher end has always been a problem because you need to have a very specific skill set. So I don't think that's an issue. I just think we just have a lack of actual talent that has the knowledge base for the higher end jobs, but I think that's a very small end of the market. So we are correct. There is a shortage of these jobs, but again, I don't think it was created specifically because of COVID. I think what happened is what he just said. We had people who should have not been working all that time anyway. They should have been staying at home. They should have been working on their budgets. They should have been making the quality of life at home better. And I do think that's why they're staying home more. And again, the numbers seem to push that fact out. Now, the next part of this that I want to deal with is when he starts talking about Powell getting involved with this. Now, those of you who remember this will remember that one of the words or phrases that Powell said from the beginning that everyone beat him up for is this word transitory, which is what Dave is trying to say here. He's not using the word transitory, but it's exactly what he means when he says that the market would work this out on its own. I personally agree with that. He clearly agrees with it. And here's the interesting part. Powell agreed with it. Powell thought it. And when I said earlier, I meant I think he's been bullied into doing what he's doing. Now, for 2 reasons, I think he allowed himself to be bullied into this. Now, part of it is having interest rates at 0 is not a good thing for anyone. I don't care what anybody says. I'm sorry. The federal funds rate does not need to be at 0 or 0 1/4. It was pushed down there because of COVID, period. He didn't want it to be there. So in my opinion, he started raising it because of things like this. And I'm going to show you my issue with it. So this is in October of 2021. The Fed is far behind the curve. Here's another one. The Fed is still behind the curve in April of last year. Not this year, last year. So when we sit back and want to beat up Powell for doing what he's doing, how about we beat up the media and everybody else that pressured him to do what he's doing? Because again, I don't think he needs to be where he's at. But let's just follow the facts for a minute. Let's say you're Jay Powell for a minute. And your ultimate goal, when this is all said and done, is to have about a 2.5% federal funds rate, maybe somewhere between 2 and 3. If you push it up to 5, 5.25, 5.5, and then you need to pull it back so that you don't slow the economy too far, doesn't that kind of fit what's going on here? And again, this is not necessarily factual because I can't give you facts, and Powell is not going to say it. But let's just speculate a little bit because it fits the narrative of what's actually happening. If I were Powell, I would be doing the same thing. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the 70s and some models and stuff, but those of you who heard my other videos, if he can raise interest rates up to even 5.5 and not raise unemployment and get inflation down, is that not his job? And if he can then pull it back to say 3% and get the economy, where he wants it to be, is that not where things are supposed to go and doing what he's supposed to do? Again, just throwing it out there.
They're going to slow the economy down because it's white hot, which it's not. It was just going through a burp, rat through a snake, trying to get itself straightened out after the quarantine created by Fauci. So now we have a Federal Reserve that is trying to screw in a Phillips head screwdriver with a hammer.
And they keep ratcheting
They're using
this
the
thing
wrong
up.
tool.
So they're trying to ratchet this interest rate up to calm people down. But people don't seem to be stopping their spending either. We're at record high consumer debt across the board.
No, they slowed the real estate market down,
which
for sure.
Didn't help a ton, it seems.
No.
So here's my question. He says the economy's not rolling around red hot. And I guess that can be debated. But here's my question. If unemployment's at 3.5 and we're getting inflation under control, people are continuing to spend, where is the economy in a toilet? And again, I'm trying to deal with reality here. Show it to me. I don't know anyone that wants a job that can't get a job. Other than inflation being higher than I'd like it to be, and again, we're at 4.9. It's high, but not 9. And it was only 9 for a month. So I'm having a hard time grasping what I'm missing here. And he says that he's using a hammer on a screw. Okay, please tell me what else he has to work with. Because this is the part I don't understand everybody beating Jay up for. He only has that to work with. So you beat him up for not doing anything. And now we're beating him up for doing something, which is the only thing he can do. You might say it's the wrong thing, okay? What's the right thing other than doing nothing? Which my problem with doing nothing is, what if we're wrong? What if things have now changed? What if the initial inflation went up because of shutting down the world, and now the inflation is actually being caused by market issues? Because again, when you look at the actual data, and all of the inputs are lower, but prices are continuing to go up, why? I've got speculations, but I want to deal with reality, and I don't know what the reality is yet. But if that's the case, then the only thing you have left is that the businesses are just charging more because they can. They're not charging more because the inputs are going up, because they're not. Look at it. Airlines are going up in prices. Why? Their gasoline's down significantly year over year, and yet their prices are up. Can't explain that. Gas prices at the pump are higher than they were the last time the Brent crude was at $77 a barrel. Why? Can't explain it. I'm having a bigger problem with what he's talking about here because it's not fitting reality.
Oh, we still have a shortage of housing compared to the supply of buyers. But anyway, so bottom line is the Fed is stupid.
Okay, once again, we're calling the Fed stupid. But here's one thing they did do with real estate, and I'm glad he brought that back up. Real estate was up 17% year over year from up to 21. 21 to 22, it was up 20% year over year. We cannot have that kind of inflation in housing. And I don't know how to slow it down otherwise. We need to have supply and demand in balance. And typically speaking, in properly functioning markets, at some point the consumer is going to go, enough is enough, I'm not buying anymore. And currently we're seeing that in the real estate market. We're not seeing it continue to go up. When you look at the CPI numbers, please understand there's at least a 6-month lag in those numbers. at a minimum, sometimes even up to a year, just because of the way it's calculated. Now, I don't want to go into that on this video, but trust me, it's a lag. But even if we're just dead even year over year in real estate, and he had to raise interest rates 5% to do that, honestly, I'm okay with that. Because again, it's a short period of time. The vast majority of people have mortgages that are in well under 4%. And if you got in and you got a 6% rate, who's to say 2 or 3 years from now you can't refinance and get the lower rate? So again, I'm not as disappointed in that. Something had to be done about the real estate market. And if that's what had to be done, that's great. Otherwise, I don't know what the answer would be. I don't know what was going to slow it down. As Dave continues to say, we still have a shortage of existing homes. What's going to stop the prices from continuing to spiral other than just saying, hey, we got less people looking at them because they can't afford it and they don't want to pay the interest rates? At least that part's gone. But again, that's a reality issue.
And they're trying to
In
use
summary,
1970s and 1980s monetary policy to slow down a different type of inflation that was not created by the interest rate environment. And they're trying to use the interest rate environment, so they're literally using the wrong tool on the economy. They really are using a hammer on a screw.
Okay, now he's beating him up for using 1980s and 1970s models. Let's get another thing clear. It's all we have. Okay, it is the only time frame that we can go back to and look at inflation doing what it's doing. It's all we've got. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. But here's the bigger question. We all knew that when we shut things down, there were going to be things that break and there was going to be problems. To what extent, nobody really knows or knew at the time. We knew something was going to happen. We didn't know what exactly it was going to be. But if I'm Powell at this point, my concern is not getting past the COVID problem. My concern is, does it become systemic? Does it become something bigger? Does it actually become a market problem after the fact? Once we get through all of the issues and the snake issue that he was giving up, where we actually get through the bottleneck, what if it becomes something bigger than that? What if it does actually become systemic? That's what Powell has to look at. That's the future he has to look at. So here's a guy that's saying that Powell is stupid because he's looking beyond today and tomorrow, going, hey, we got to make sure that we have this under control, not just for today, not just for tomorrow, but for the next decade. And again, you want to beat him up for the models, that's great. But we also put words in Powell's mouth, and I hate it when we do it. And those of you who see my other videos, you get this. Powell is not saying he has to destroy the economy. What he's saying is that by the models that he has, if he raises interest rates, inflation should come down. But unemployment should go up and it should slow the economy. That's what should happen. Doesn't have to happen. Not that he's trying to make it happen. What he's trying to do is keep inflation down and unemployment down, which, since June, he has been able to get inflation from 9.1 down to 4.9 and keep unemployment at around 3.5%. Kind of looks like he's doing his job. And I wouldn't say that's stupid. That's just me. So this is all I want to get out on this. I want to make sure we understand that inflation's not exactly what Dave is saying on here. I'm not trying to beat anybody up with it. Let's just deal with reality. The reality is we're at 4.9 inflation. And going forward, here's what we have to look at. And I want to focus on this. Last year, you had 8.6. Then you had 9.1. And then we had 8.5. And then it starts to go down. But I want to focus on the oil. You have 4.5 here, and you've got 5 here, and then you've got 4.6 here. So the next 3 months, to me, are crucial as far as inflation is concerned. If we do not get inflation back into the threes within the next 3 months, I do think we're going to have a problem. I do think it's going to stagnate once we get to these numbers, because these stagnate on the gas prices, and I do think inflation itself is going to become an issue. And unless we can truly figure out why, if all the input costs are going down, why inflation continues to go up, we got a bigger issue. I'm hoping that the major issue is just real estate. That real estate is not showing up in the numbers, that the lag in real estate is an issue, and because it's almost 39% of the CPI, that's the question. But we don't know the answer to that yet. It's the only one that fits the narrative. It's the only one that actually fits reality. So we'll just have to see if that happens. I'm hoping that with this real estate slowing down and over time, because it's such a large portion of it, the rest of when you look at the CPI numbers, that these are all going to start coming down. These are down big. But these are the ones that are the problems. This is food. This one I'm not as concerned about because I do think that'll make transportation to take care of itself. People are going to say, I'm not going to pay $1,800 to go to some Caribbean island for 5 days. They're going to stop doing that. That'll correct itself with time. It's this other stuff that's the problem. It's the things we have to have. It's the cereal. It's the chicken. It's the stuff we need every single day. That's going to be a big issue. And again, when you've got real estate shelter up 8%, that's a problem. But if we can get this down to where it should be, we can get it down to say 1 or 2%, or maybe even 3%, and it's 40% of the CPI, this may just come in line. You have to look at it from a bigger standpoint, and Dave's not doing that, and it bothers me, especially when a lot of people are listening to him. You got to listen to what he's saying, and what he's saying, there's nothing factual in there. He's just making these grandiose statements. And again, calling people stupid. You sound like Trump there for a minute. Hate to say that, but you do. What makes him stupid? What has he done that's stupid? Other than possibly being bullied into doing something. He said the same thing you did, Dave. He thinks this is transitory. Okay? So what if he really does think it's transitory, and the only reason he's actually raising rates is so that when all this is said and done, he can have a 2.5–3% federal funds rate and not have destroyed the economy. And the reason he did that is because the economy is really strong. Which again, that's more of the reality. The economy is not in the toilet. The only thing that's in the toilet right now that we don't like is inflation. The rest of it's doing fine. People are making good wages. And I do think the data supports the fact that people are staying home. And hopefully they're doing that because they're actually having a better quality of life. And if we're having a better quality of life, I tell you what, I'd rather have 3.5% inflation and have the majority of the country being able to have one income families rather than two and enjoying life better. That's just me. Dickie out.